Hello and welcome back to our channel. Today we venture to the County Durham market town of Barnard Castle, and more specifically to the castle itself, where we shall explore its eventful history. We'd love you to join us on this fascinating journey. The town of Barnard Castle, not unsurprisingly, grew up around the medieval castle named after one Barnard de Balliol. More about him later. Prior to the Norman conquest, the upper half of the Teesdale Valley was an Anglo-Norse estate centred around the ancient village of Gainford, which is situated around 8 miles east of Barnard Castle. During the late 11th century, King William II created the Barony of Bywell on the River Tyne and gave it to a knight by the name of Guy de Balliol. He was also granted lands in Teesdale, including parts of the Gainford estate. The very first castle at Barnard probably dates back from this time, but would most likely have only covered the very highest point of the plateau upon which the current castle now stands. This early castle would have been made mainly from timber and enclosed by a bank and ditch. Guy de Balliol was succeeded by his nephew, Barnard de Balliol, from whom the castle and growing estate surrounding it took its name. Barnard's tenure at the castle came at a time of great instability in the north of England. Following the death of Henry I, a civil war known as the Anarchy broke out. There was a disagreement over the crown between Matilda, Henry's daughter, and her cousin Stephen. David I of Scotland took full advantage of this unrest and attempted to impose his rule over northern England. Barnard de Balliol sided with Stephen during this conflict and fought against the Scots at the Battle of the Standards at Cowton Moor in 1138 and at the Battle of Lincoln in 1141, during which he and Stephen were taken prisoner by Matilda. It was at some point during these troubled times that Barnard began rebuilding his castle in stone. Barnard was succeeded by his sons Guy and Barnard II, who completed the rebuilding of the castle. In around 1210, a later descendant of the family, Hugh Balliol, granted the common land to the townspeople of Barnard Castle, declaring, "These I grant to them and their heirs freely and quietly, and wholly in respect of roads, paths, moors, marshes, turfs, peats, plains, pastures, rights of entry and exit, and all rights of common liberties and easements belonging to the town of Barnard Castle, inside the town and outside the town." Hugh was also a strong supporter of King John, who stayed at the castle on the 30th of January 1216. The next heir to the castle was one John Balliol. He married a very wealthy heiress by the name of de Vorgila, daughter of Alan, Lord of Galloway. De Vorgila inherited a third of all her father's estates, and as such, John Balliol became a very rich and powerful figure in both England and Scotland. Their marriage was not one of convenience, however, but one of true love, and when John died in 1268, de Vorgila had his heart embalmed and placed in a casket, which she kept with her at all times. For the remainder of her life, she had food served at her table as though John were still there, and after each meal she would distribute the food among the poor of Barnard Castle. In 1273 she endowed Sweetheart Abbey near Dumfries in John's memory, and when she died in 1290 she was buried there with John's heart between her breasts. If that's not true love, we don't know what is. And now, while we've got your attention, we'd like to remind you that if you've not already subscribed to our channel, it would be great if you did. And also, if you could give us likes and leave plenty of comments, and we'll get back to you. But now, without further ado, on to the rest of the video, and goodbye from us. Bye! John and Dervogila's son, John II, inherited the lordship from 1278, and although he took the family to the height of its success, he was also instrumental in its downfall. In 1268, Alexander III of Scotland died, leaving his granddaughter Margaret, the Maid of Norway, as his heir, but she died in 1291, leaving a vacancy for the Scottish throne. In steps John Balliol II, who was given the Scottish throne in 1292. His reign was cut short, however, when he rejected the authority of King Edward I and made an alliance with the French. An English invasion followed, and John was captured and held prisoner in the Tower of London. His English estates were confiscated. You can get a really good impression how tight and narrow these passageways were. I'm going to make sure I don't measure my length, as we say. Great sense of history. Now, down a narrow passageway again. And here is the Undercraft. The floor of the round tower was for storage and domestic use. There's another garderobe, no, toilet, behind us, and a fireplace and a well, apparently. There must be the well down there. And so the sign says on here, the little plaque says, the Undercraft had 3 small arrow loops, which gave covering fire to the base of the tower. There we go. 2 of them are still in their original form, except this one has changed. I wonder what it says there. Ah, yes, well, as it is, the other one was converted into a rectangular opening. In 1307, on his deathbed, Edward I bestowed the Barnard Castle estate on Guy de Beauchamp, 10th Earl of Warwick. Warwick's successors held the castle until 1471. The estate eventually passed to Anne Beauchamp, who was married to Richard Neville, who became 16th Earl of Warwick. And following his death, most of his estates were granted to Richard, Duke of Gloucester, future King Richard III, by his brother King Edward IV. Richard married Anne Neville, daughter of the Earl of Warwick, and also inherited Barnard Castle. He became one of the biggest magnates of the north of England, and there is reason to believe that he took a personal interest in Barnard Castle, making improvements to the main accommodation in the inner ward. He was killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, and in 1486 his mother-in-law petitioned Henry VII for the return of the Beauchamp estates. She was granted a portion of these in return for relinquishing the remainder of her inheritance to the crown. Barnard Castle therefore remained a royal possession, but for its revenue only, and was never paid much attention following this. Right, okay, so here we have what's called the Brackenbury Tower. Sounds interesting. And there's a plaque over here. Let's check out what it says. Now, it says this floor was used not only as a storeroom, but also as living quarters, since it contains a fireplace. I don't know where that would be. Could that be down here? Yeah, okay, it must be. A garderobe, latrine, let's put it that way, and two small cupboards. It must have been a dark room, as there's only one surviving window. Okay, all right, so that's the one surviving window then. And it says, although it was built in the 12th century, the town is possibly named after Sir Robert Brackenbury, who was Lieutenant of the Tower of London during the reign of Richard III. And I thought I'd heard that name somewhere before, Brackenbury. I think it's actually, in Shakespeare's Richard III. Could be wrong. By 1536, Sir Robert Bowes was keeper of the castle, when an uprising known as the Pilgrimage of Grace broke out in Yorkshire and other parts of the north. The rebels descended on Barnard Castle, where Bowes surrendered it without a fight and joined the insurrection. In 1569, yet another rebellion took place, and this time it was Sir Robert's nephew, Sir George Bowes, who was keeper of the castle. The Rising of the North was instigated by the region's ancient nobility, who wanted to depose Queen Elizabeth I and replace her with Mary Stuart, who was being held captive at Bolton Castle. The aim was to restore Catholicism to England. Sir George was a committed Protestant and stayed at Barnard Castle with a force of 700 or so men in preparation for the upcoming storm. On the 2nd of December 1569, Barnard Castle was besieged by a 5,000-strong army, who breached the walls of the outer ward after bombarding the castle for several hours. By the 8th of December, the army had captured the outer wards, and shortly after, took the town ward, causing George's men to retreat to the inner ward. Following the last of the outer ward, Sir George's men began to defect, dropping themselves over the walls and in many cases causing themselves serious injury. After this, more than 100 men opened the gates and went over to the enemy. On the 10th of December, Sir George's horsemen, acting on his orders, broke out of the castle and through enemy ranks to join forces loyal to Elizabeth. All of this forced Sir George to enter into negotiations with the rebels for his safe passage, along with his remaining followers, in return for his surrender of the castle. The 11 days the siege had taken, however, had given time for a royal force to be assembled, and the insurgency was in the end defeated. This was to be the castle's swan song. Following this, it was neglected and left to ruin. Of course, with such an eventful history, you might expect there to be a ghost or two wandering around the castle grounds, and you wouldn't be disappointed. Over the years, there have been reports of the spectre of a woman in white toppling over the castle walls, and screams have even been heard as she falls to the River Tees below. Thought to be Lady Anne Day, who lived during the 16th century. We know little else about her, and whether her death was a nasty accident or something more sinister. That's not quite the end of our story of Barnard Castle, as it had one further resident in the 19th century, despite its ruinous state, a character popularly titled the Hermit of Barnard Castle. He was in fact a reclusive chap by the name of Frank Shields, who moved himself into the Round Tower during the early 1840s. According to the 1851 census, Frank was a recluse, antiquary, and artist of painting. He would give tourists guided tours, having made it his business to study the castle's history. Unfortunately, due to an altercation with a neighbour, Frank was evicted from the castle in 1859, after which he relocated to Eggleston Abbey. In 1874, he was sadly admitted to an asylum suffering delusions about ghosts, and he died there in 1881. Having visited Eggleston Abbey ourselves, we aren't so sure Frank was suffering from delusions. But more about that in a future video. That brings us to the end of our visit to Barnard Castle, and as usual, we hope you have enjoyed it and will continue to support our channel by clicking the thumbs up and leaving a comment. We are particularly interested to hear where in the world our viewers are watching from, so let us know. Thank you for watching.